Today, I don't know whether this is your first time here or you come all the time, but you guys aren't refugees or randoms to us. You're relatives, and you're welcome here. And we're going to continue having a good time, and you're a part of the family. So thank you for coming, and we're excited about what we're going to be speaking about today. So there's another family I want to talk about, and this is a family that they did something pretty cool. So I read it in an article, and it was from 2 years ago, and there was this family, and their daughter was getting married, so they decided their gift to the daughter would be that they would pay for her whole reception, and they were going to pay for 200 guests for a 4-course dinner after the wedding ceremony. So that was pretty generous of them, and they started all the preparations. They booked this really classy, nice place, and the daughter was super excited. Everything was going well, but then just 40 days before the wedding, it actually got called off. So the family were devastated. Oh, there's a picture of them right here. And they were pretty devastated, and then they thought, oh man, they're already sad, but then they realized, hey, we've already booked this dinner. We've already paid for this dinner for 200 guests. What are we going to do? So they prayed about it, and the parents, and they were praying about it, and they were thinking, what can we do? Maybe we'll pray and we could get the money back and we can use it for something else. But when they both woke up, they said, actually, we're going to give it away. So they's like, who are we going to give it away to? Should we just invite our friends anyway and have a party? And then they decided, no, we're going to give it away to homeless people in our streets of Atlanta, where this couple was from. So they went and they found 200 people. They called the place that they had booked, this classy establishment, and they said, hey guys, the wedding's cancelled, but don't worry, we're inviting 200 of our friends. They're all homeless. And the company kind of thought this was a joke, or they were like, oh, what about our reputation? And so it happened anyway. The parents went out and their daughter joined them, and they actually, here's a picture of it right here. Look at this. 200 homeless people got to have a 4-course dinner at this classy establishment. And they just walked around the streets and they invited them in. And the coolest thing is that none of these guys would ever have eaten in a place like that. And they didn't just get to eat there and have the 4-course meal. They got dined on and waited on. They got treated with respect, and their dignity was back. And it was the coolest thing. And just reading it, I got super pumped and excited and wanted to do something similar. But I thought how cool it was. And then the family, they said they actually enjoyed it so much, and so many people that read about it in the article, they also said they wanted to join. And since then, twice they've hosted a dinner which they call a celebration love dinner, where they just invite all kinds of people, not just homeless, but anyone struggling, and it's all sponsored and paid for by people who just want to help and be generous. Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I thought that story was awesome. And today we're going to be speaking about the same sort of thing, about this outrageous hospitality. So we're in part 2, like Jamie said, of our series. And it's a series about living a life of generosity. So just giving it all away, just like this family did. And it's actually something that I'm super passionate about. I love hospitality. And ever since I was little, hospitality has been ingrained in me from my family. So my parents owned 2 restaurants when I was growing up, so it wasn't just that kind of hospitality, but also in our home. Our home was almost like a hotel and a restaurant all in one. So some examples of this is every Saturday after church, my parents would invite any guests or visitors from church back to our house. So my mum would prepare the food on Friday for anywhere from between 2 to 20 people. So we always knew it was going to be a good lunch on Saturday. We were excited about it, and we'd have all kinds of randoms around. And then another example is one time my dad, he was driving from Auckland to New Plymouth, where we lived, and he picked up a hitchhiker, brought him home with him, and the hitchhiker stayed at our house for 3 weeks. So that was pretty cool. Another time was 2 Christmases ago. My mum found these French backpackers, and she brought them home with us, and they had Christmas with us and spent the week with us. So there was always situations like this happening, and it was such a cool thing to experience. And I think I got a photo. Yeah, you can't really see it that well. My mum actually found these and sent them from New Plymouth to me last night, so her technology was pretty good for her to be able to do that. But these are just some photos of all different gatherings we had at our house. And so it was something that I was really used to, and so I love it. And in fact, I love it so much that this year I actually moved out of the house I was in to move into a house where I could have space to host people and be hospitable myself. So the last flat I was at, I wasn't allowed people over, and it was like the worst thing ever for me. So yeah, it's something I'm passionate about, but I want you guys to be passionate about it too. And I can learn so much more about how to be hospitable. I'm glad that my parents set a good example for me, but there is so much more I can learn, and I want us together today to learn how to show outrageous hospitality. Sound good? Excellent. So if you hear something exciting today, you can just say it. Don't hold back, because sometimes when I'm up here speaking, I see a lot of faces like this, and I'm like, come on, God just said something good. So if you guys feel it, don't just sit on the hands, just let it out. So I don't know whether you can just nod your head or something. I'll be really excited about that. So, yeah, thank you. That's good. It's going to be good stuff today, so brace yourself. So, to fully understand outrageous hospitality, we all need to be on the same page. So, I went to the English dictionary, which is always a good place to start. I looked up the word hospitality, and this is what it said. It said, a friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, and who? Strangers. That's right. And then I looked a little further this week, and I actually looked it up in the Greek as well. And then the Greek, the word hospitality is philoxenia. You want to try say that? Philoxenia. Philoxenia, yeah. So philo is made up of two words, as you can see. Philo means love in Greek, and xenia means strangers. So the very word hospitality means what? Love strangers. Pretty cool, huh? So I was excited when I saw that, because actually the word hospitality in itself is an instruction to us to do what? Love strangers, that's right. And that's exactly what I want to be talking about today. I want to encourage us all to not only live a life of giving it away and of outrageous hospitality, but of loving strangers always. So I want to share a verse with you, and this is a verse, and it was written in a time where Jesus' followers, they were actually being persecuted for their faith. So just for believing in God, they were getting killed, they were getting tortured, bad stuff was happening. And so the author of this book, and we're not quite sure who it was, some people say Paul, but when he was writing to these Christians, he was encouraging them to not lose their faith, but to persevere and just keep going no matter what they were going through. And this is what he said. It's found in Hebrews 13, and he says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters, which sounds pretty easy. And then he says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for in doing so, some people have even shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. I think that's the coolest verse ever. But if we look at it, the amazing thing is it's an instruction to all of us. So whether you believe in God or not, it's an instruction for all of us, because he's actually just saying, hey, this is what it means to be human. Doesn't matter if you're Christian, doesn't matter if you're not. Being human, we need to care for people. So firstly, he breaks it down and he says, keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. The keep on is like, this is something that you should already be doing. It's expected of you. You've already been taught this, so keep doing it. Then he goes to the next and he says, don't forget. So it's another reminder saying to us, you already know this. You already should be doing this. So don't forget to show hospitality to strangers, for in doing so you have shown hospitality to angels without even knowing it. And it's easy for us to show hospitality to our friends, to our family, to those we choose. But to show it to strangers, that's a whole nother level right there. And this is what he's saying. He's saying, I want you guys to just step out of your comfort zone a little bit more, because when you do, that's when we are showing love, our love for God. It's going that extra step. So, how would this verse actually look in practice? I thought about it, and then I thought, actually, the perfect example has already been set before us, and it was set into action by the early church. When this church first started, the thing that they were focused on the most was actually loving strangers. And it's something that had never been seen before in this time. These guys, they knew what it meant to love strangers always. They had already set the bar of what it looks like. They were this whole movement of people that loved strangers, that showed hospitality, that let people into their home. They began to be hospitable with all of their resources and anything they had. They shared meals in each other's homes. They hosted guests and strangers. They sold their possessions just so everybody could have their needs met. And they knew what it meant to live in community. They knew what it meant to show outrageous hospitality. So these guys, these were the movement. This is where it all started. And you might be thinking, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That's cool. That's good. But it's actually more than cool. It's more than good. It's outrageous. And to understand why it's outrageous, we need to look at the context. And what we see is that during this time, it was actually a time where the Roman Empire was in rule. And this Roman Empire, they didn't even care about the people at all, so they didn't expect other people to care about each other either. So the early church coming and doing this was like something so unheard of. And there were Jesus followers that were showing care and love, not just to each other, but to all people. So they were bridging the gap between Romans, between the Gentiles, the Jews, the Christians. They were just sharing the love with anyone. And these guys were like, what is happening here? This is unheard of. This was a brand new thing at the time. And to understand even more how crazy this was, so the Roman Empire that were in rule, they were actually a slave culture. So there was actually more slaves in this place and at the time than there was Roman citizens. So slaves were everywhere, and slaves were people who didn't get respected. People just thought they get what they deserved, and it wasn't like a love everyone kind of culture. So when the early church started to show compassion and care for everyone, welcoming them, accepting them, loving them, this was outrageous. And now you get to see why this was outrageous hospitality. And so not only was this already crazy that they were loving everyone and including everyone, they also went a step further. So there was no building like the one we're sitting in right now. So, if they had have shown love to everyone just in a church building, that would have already be pretty cool. But there was no building, so they had to show love to everyone in their own homes, inside their personal lives, in their own little perfect world. They had to open it up for everyone. And so that meant that every single person had to take responsibility themselves, they had to take ownership, and they had to be willing to not only show it out there, but show it in their homes as well. So this was an awesome movement that was happening. It was good stuff. So the coolest part of this is that each person was willing. They didn't just be like, oh, well, I'll do it on the weekend, on a Saturday or Sunday. But they did it every day of the week, sharing meals in each other's houses, sharing what they had, their resources. They were just this hospitable movement of people, which was amazing. And I thought about it and I was like, man, you know what? I wish we live in a world like that. Because, yeah, we're hospitable, but there's fences and walls keeping people out, not keeping people in between our houses. And people's doors are shut, not open, letting anyone in. I love seeing movies of, when you see like a chair on the porch and some old granddad or somebody's rocking there and someone's going past and they have a chat and they have a yarn. That doesn't happen anymore. You see a fence and an electric gate letting people in and out if you're lucky. And I just thought, man, I wish I lived in a place like this. The coolest thing is that the ripple effects of what they did all the way back then in this crazy movement of the early church, it's actually still impacting us today. Over 2,000 years later, here at Gracegate, we want to continue to be an outrageous, hospitable church, just like they were then. So why do you think this movement started in the first place? Why do you think that they actually bothered to value hospitality so much? It was actually the last thing, like we heard, it's the last thing was expected of them, and no one would have held them accountable or said, you dropped the ball or anything like that, because they didn't have to. Well, here's the reason why. They started it because they had seen the example from Jesus himself. He had given it to them. He had opened their eyes to what it means to truly be hospitable, and he opened their eyes behind why they bothered to start this movement, and here's how. On one occasion, this is a little bit back from where we were reading before, one occasion Jesus was talking to a crowd of people, and he was talking to his followers as well. And these are the guys that later on started the early church movement. So he was talking to them, and he was sharing all kinds of parables and stories, and then he shared this one, and he said, hey, one day I will come back and I will say, and he was talking about himself as the king, and this is what he says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was hungry and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come and visit you? The king will reply, the king being Jesus will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for me, for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. What stood out to you in those verses? We go back to the beginning of it. What's standing out to you here? The you? That's right. And then what Jesus was saying was, in essence, he was saying that, you know, if you show this type of love and this care to all people, it's actually demonstrating how much you love and care for me. It's not just an idea, he said, well, you know, if you look after enough people or you treat them like this or clothe them or give them food to eat, then maybe you might reflect me. He's saying, no, this is actually the exact way how you do it. He's just saying, if you go ahead and you show this love, this care, you visit people, you care for them, you meet their needs, this is exactly how you show love to me. And when the Jesus followers heard this, they couldn't help but hold it back. They got it. It made sense to them. It was clear. And so the early church burst into movement. They saw people as valuable as God sees them. They saw them as someone who matters to God. They began to show care to all people. In doing it, they did it so much so that they were doing it as if they were doing it for Jesus himself. And they did it simply by showing hospitality. Can you imagine what our community would look like if we did the same kind of thing? If we practiced this kind of hospitality? Imagine if an isolated person found connection because we showed hospitality, or people's needs were met, both physically, like clothing and food and stuff, but also relationally, so they felt connected and like they belonged. And if a stranger found a home here, and while we're doing all of this, if we reflected God and his heart for all people, it would be a pretty cool place. The coolest thing is that each one of us has a role to play. Sometimes you think in a church, oh, it's just up to the staff or it's just up to the volunteers, but it's actually not. It's every single one of you sitting here today and more. In your sphere of influence, you're in contact with people that I may never ever meet, and they're in your sphere of influence for a reason. The people that you meet each day, that you pass, your barista at the coffee shop, wherever it is, they're in your life for a reason. They're not in mine. And the people that you're in proximity with who are around you, they're actually in your care, which means it's your responsibility to show them hospitality. So knowing that God expects hospitality from you and he would love you to show hospitality, how do you think you're treating the people around you in your sphere of influence? Are you loving them enough? Are you caring for them enough and showing God's heart for them enough? Each one of us has a role to play. And when we talk about hospitality, a lot of people will think maybe it's just about food or a meal together. And you think, you know what, it's not actually something I was designed to do. I'm not great at cooking. I'm not great at hosting people. And you come up with a lot of excuses. We all do, myself included, where you say, oh, I would, but I don't have enough time, or I would, but I don't have enough space in my house, or I would, but I don't have enough money, or I would, but I don't know how to cook. The list goes on and on. But actually, if you don't know how to cook, that's fine. Just order in some pizzas, or put on some 2-minute noodles. It's not about the food. It's not a formal thing. It's actually just about hanging out together and inviting people in. So don't let your excuse get in the way of how you could reflect God's love and value to someone. Hospitality is so much more than just food. It could be going for a coffee with someone. It could be going for a walk with them. It could be playing sports together. It's using whatever resources you have as opportunities to be able to serve God and just connect and love people. It's that simple. But it can be that simple, yet every day we seem to miss it around us. So you need to pay attention. You need to take off your blinkers and you need to focus, looking around you. Who is God bringing into your life every day that you could connect with? He's bringing people into our life every day that actually feel like strangers. They actually feel like outsiders, like they don't belong, that they don't have a connection. And those people can be right beside you and you have no idea. Imagine the opportunities you would miss if you weren't paying attention to who God was bringing into your life. You need to be intentional, we all do. When I was 18, I had just turned 18 and 1 month when I just turned 18, if that makes sense. Anyway, I just moved out of home and I grew up in New Plymouth and then I moved to Rotorua. And so in New Plymouth, I had my friends, my family, my comfort zone. I was in the zone. And then I moved to Rotorua. I got a full-time job there. I started working. I lived by myself, so I moved out of home and lived by myself. I started working full-time and I knew nobody in Rotorua and I found it so isolating. I felt like a stranger in my own country. And I felt like an outsider in the company that I worked for because they all knew each other and I didn't know anyone. And it was the most horrible feeling. Then there was this one older guy and he invited me and another volunteer that was there to his house once a week for a meal. And his house was a complete mess and we ate a lot of 2-minute noodles. But it wasn't about the food. It was the fact that he invited us every single week to his house. And we'd just watch TV, we'd hang out, sometimes we'd play cards. It wasn't really about what we did, but the coolest thing was that he noticed, he took time, he invited me in, he invited this other volunteer who was from Germany in, and it became our little family. And it was the simplest thing to do. He didn't have to put on a fancy meal or clean his home or anything. He just took the time, noticed, and I felt like I had somewhere where I belonged. And it was so simple and so easy. And putting hospitality into practice can actually be as simple and easy as that. Here's some ideas of how we can do it. You can get together with your family or with your group of friends or your flatmates or whatever it is. You can look at your calendar for the month and you can think, okay, this night, pick one night a month to start with, is a night where we're going to host a meal at our house or go out to a restaurant at our house and host some people that we're not normally in connection with. Or you can invite your kids' friends over and let them come to your house all the time where you can demonstrate love and acceptance and value for them. It's pretty easy. Or you could go to the local university. You know how many international students there are in Auckland? There is a lot. And in Massey University, which is really close to us, there's so many international students that come over and they actually feel isolated and they feel alone and they feel like strangers in our own country. It's hard moving. It was hard for me in my own country. Imagine how hard it is for them. And they actually have a program where you can host an international student or a few. It's pretty easy, but it will make the world of difference to them. Or maybe for you, it's in your company. You go for coffees during the day. What if you invited or asked somebody that you don't usually speak to or that might have just started working there and you just invite them to join you next time? You never know what sort of connections and support network will form just from you doing something so simple like that, and it could make the world of difference to that person. And it's not just random coincidence that they are in your proximity. It's actually intentionally planned by God, and He has wired you to respond. It's unfortunate, but we live in a know everyone yet know no one kind of world, where people can be surrounded by people and yet still feel so isolated and so alone. And if you and I don't take action, then who will? Maybe they feel they'll live in a world disconnected until somebody makes that first connection. As a church, we want to put this kind of outrageous hospitality into practice. That's why we give away free coffees in the mornings. Who had a free coffee this morning? That's awesome. And that's just to host people. That's it. No strings attached. That's also why we share lunches every Saturday after church. It's coming soon, guys. Just wait. And that's also why we have life groups that you can invite people to, that you can join. That's also why we put on socials, so we can host people in the community, that they can attend and they can find connection. It's also why we do everything that we do here. We want to create a hospitable place that people will call home. There was this hotel franchise in America, and 2 years ago they won an award for being the most hospitable hotel in America. So a reporter went and interviewed them afterwards and said, what is it, what's your secret? How did you win this award? And they said, hey, it's actually all in our slogan. And this is what our slogan said. I think, there we go. We'll leave the light on for you. That's it. They didn't overthink it. They didn't complicate it. They simply said, hey, we're going to be the kind of hotel that will leave the light on for you. And in saying that, they were saying, if you get there at the end of a long, hard day, if you arrive in the middle of the night, if you are from a completely different country, we'll be there. This is your home. The light will be left on. We'll be ready, waiting, and expecting you. Pretty awesome, huh? And how cool would it be if we were a church who just left the light on for people? We were ready, waiting, and expecting them. It'd be pretty cool. And I thought about a hotel. And in a hotel, there's hundreds of rooms, and there's different fancy spaces. And every single room and space is actually there for one reason, and that is to care for people. And in our church, we have all different kinds of rooms and spaces and garages and storage areas and kitchens and all kinds of things. And that every single room is here for one reason, and that is to care for people. So we're pretty much like a hotel. But I thought it's so cool, because wouldn't it be awesome if we were like that kind of church? We left the light on for people, and the best news is we can be, and you can all be a part of it. Just because you think, oh, well, I can't do everything, it doesn't actually mean you can't do anything. It can be like this. You could bring something to share for the lunch. You can make someone a coffee in the morning. You can volunteer to greet people at the door, give them a hug and a smile as they come in. It's simple, and you could invite someone to your life group. You could sit next to someone at church who you haven't met before and just love on people, no strings attached. If there was no hospitality, there would actually be no church. Do you think about that? Our outrageous hospitality towards others flows from our response to God's outrageous hospitality towards us. In saying that, I'll read it again because it's good. It says, outrageous hospitality towards others flows from our response to God's outrageous hospitality towards us. Do you know, if you don't even know anything about God, He's already been outrageously hospitable to you. He's already done so much for you, even if you're a stranger to Him. And He constantly does. He invites us in, and He calls us not as refugees or randoms, but as relatives, as part of His family too. He's one generous God, and He shows hospitality to all of us. If we put loving strangers always into action in both our personal lives, in our church, and in our community, can you imagine what a ripple effect that would create? Think what a difference it would make in even just one person's life that comes to your mind. Some of the times in my own life when I've actually experienced the most hospitality has been in the most unlikely places where people actually had so little, yet they gave so much. And last year, a team from Gracegate, and this year, we went to Fiji. And when we were in Fiji, I actually experienced the craziest hospitality. This was outrageous hospitality. They had just experienced a cyclone last year that destroyed their homes, their village, their school, their town, everything. And then they hosted us with such hospitality. They gave their own mattresses off their bed. They stayed up all day and night to cook for us. They even slept out in the open to be able to cook for us early in the morning. They gave us a washing machine from a nearby village so we didn't have to wash our clothes in a bucket. And they lent us one of the village cars just so we could get around. That's crazy hospitality, right? And the coolest thing is that by doing this hospitality that they showed, it wasn't actually just reflecting them. It was speaking volumes, but it was speaking volumes of God's love for us and the way they cared for us. And God's love was the main thing that stood out just by them doing their little part. So, yeah, like I said at the beginning, hospitality is something that, for me personally, it's how I show my faith. And like I said, you know, when I was growing up, I grew up in this hospitable family, but it was simple stuff, like the door was never locked. There was always a spare bed for anybody, and we had a huge dining table, and all the seats were always full, and they were full with what I called randoms, but my parents called part of the family. And it was such a cool way to live, and it was always filled with people that mattered to God and therefore mattered to us. And I want to be the same kind of person. I want to be someone who does the same, where people feel like they could just come over to my house anytime, day or night, if they needed something, and where I could be on call to host or help at any given moment in time. I not only want to show this kind of like outrageous hospitality to my friends and families, though. I want to show it to strangers, to the randoms, and to the refugees, anyone that God brings across my path. And when I do, I want them to be able to see God, and not because of anything I did that was outrageous, but because He was using me to be able to show them love. I want to pay attention to who I might need to invite into my life, into my home for a meal, or who I might need to invite out for a coffee. How about you? When was the last time you used your resources as an opportunity to show hospitality? When was the last time you invited people over to your house? Not just the people you already know or the people you already care about, but when was the last time you invited a stranger over and made them feel like they were part of the family? Remember, Jesus said, "Whatever you do to the least of these, you also do to me." How amazing would it be if one day Jesus looked you in the eye and you heard Him say, "I was a stranger and you invited me in." My challenge for you and I today is that you can think of just one thing that you can start doing this week to be a part of the movement of loving strangers always.